Alright everyone, we have a slew of new polling to analyze for today's first video. We have two fairly dynamic shifts within politics over only a short period of time. The first, and there's a link in the description to this particular archived RCP page, Biden's disapproval gap, that means the gap between his disapproval, which is much higher, and his approval, is now just shy of the double-digit range, and that's in the aggregate. Keep in mind that there is still missampling going on within those polls. Biden is not as popular as he appears in that aggregate. His real gap is probably closer to 12-15 points. He's deep underwater, and the problem for him is getting worse. The disapproval is roughly steady, but his approval keeps falling. And the second is that because of one new poll, now this is from Fox News, so grain of salt mode activated, that shows Youngkin's heavily in the lead. This causes him in the aggregate to as well be in the lead for the very first time. McAuliffe has consistently led, and now the narrowing is happening right before voting. At this point, McAuliffe now has a less than 50-50 chance of being elected to that position, the technical incumbent. Youngkin now has a better than 50-50 chance of winning. Of course, that could shift back in the other direction. If you get 2 or 3 new polls, you probably will, like the day before the election is actually held, which I think is the 4th, the 6th or something, in Virginia, you're probably going to get a slew of 3 or 4 more polls, and then we'll be able to see the final verdict, and I'll be able to make an official prediction. Now, keep in mind, if you're watching this video on YouTube, there will be a pinned comment down below with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. Keep in mind, I make 2 exclusive videos every single day on those platforms, and they don't make it onto YouTube because of verboten subject matter, my verboten opinions on allowed subject matter, or simply because of overflow. And I've started to make an extra video each day, getting through some occult videos and stuff. They've been going on YouTube as well, but fairly soon there will be a 3rd exclusive every day too. So I'll be making 3 videos a day that won't go on YouTube, except on days where the 3rd video is non-political, because non-political content YouTube doesn't abuse you as much. Now, with Biden's disapproval now at 9.9, again in the aggregate, this is an average of the polls, and keeping in mind that the poll sampling methodology is heavily tilted towards the Dems, you've seen some polls that have like a plus 17 Dem advantage. That's not reality land unless you're looking at like a state. You can make a case for plus 17 Dem in the sampling size if it's maybe like fucking California or Washington State, New Mexico or something. You can't really extrapolate that to the general population because, I mean, that's not the real number. The real number is like plus 5 Dem or something like that in the general population. And also independents, I have a feeling, get undersampled in a lot of these polls. It seems like the independent number is usually lower, and that doesn't necessarily tell us a lot. What's the problem with having a bunch of independents in your polling? Well, you don't know where they lean on issues. They may say, well, I don't have a party, but 90% of the time they agree with the Democrats or with the Republicans. This could skew your poll when you're only talking about a few hundred people in that sample. If you have a missampling of 15-20% to one side or the other, it's going to screw with the final result. Now, I think that the Youngkin-McAuliffe polling is also quite telling. Again, with Fox News, you have to take it with a grain of salt. They have been roughly in line with the aggregate most of the time for the last few years. I don't know what they did with their polling methodology, but at this point, it's actually not quite as biased as most of the other legacy media polling firms. Certainly, like at CNN. CNN's massively biased. Fox News, a little bit less. They tilt. I think most polling firms do. Technically, though, so does Rasmussen, and they've been right on the button in election after election. Didn't used to be the case. Somehow their methodology now works, you know, since roughly the 2014 period. Not exactly sure what they tweaked or what changed in culture, but somehow it simply worked. YouGov, meanwhile, 2016 was doing great. 2020, not so much. And lately they've been oversampling the Dems like other polling firms. It's actually sad because they had been one of the big heavy hitters actually for some time. With Biden's disapproval, I think that these two, the reason why this video is about both of these polling numbers, smashing them together into one video, I think they're linked. Biden's demise is dragging Terry McAuliffe down. That's part of the reason. Most of it, I think, is because of his comments about parents and about schools and critical race theory. This is a losing issue for the Democrats, just like gun control, and they keep smacking themselves in the head with it instead of focusing on the issues where they would actually have feasibly a mandate. And then when they focus on those issues, they overstretch well beyond their mandate, like with the pork barrel infrastructure bill, and then they end up pissing off independents. They've been doing this now for a number of years, and it's like I typically say, if you give the Democrats an inch, they try to take a mile. If you give the Republicans a foot, they try to take an inch. This is the interplay between parties. The Republicans are just like an elephant looking at a mouse. Now, the Democrats should really replace the donkey with a mouse at this point, because oftentimes the rhinos, they do get very afraid when they're called a mean name, when they're called a fascist, you're racist, you're homophobe, or whatever, and they cower and they say, no, I'm really more progressive than you, and they play that game. What we see here is the result of people, I think, fundamentally comparing, on Biden's level, they're comparing the economy largely, it's the economy, stupid, from now with the economy under Trump, because that's relatively recent. And they're saying, well, under Trump, at the very least, prices weren't skyrocketing, gas wasn't, what the fuck cost is it per gallon? I don't even want to know. Those problems weren't happening. There was no border crisis. That seemed to be reasonably calm. They're looking at the Biden presidency and they're saying he's a screw-up. This is reflected in the polling with Youngkin versus McAuliffe. Now, again, this is only for the first time and we're at the 11th hour, so this might not be a meaningful difference. Terry McAuliffe would have carried the early voting handily, and of course, honk honk. There won't be any sudden load of 100,000 half unmarked ballots or something like that, you know, after the counting has officially stopped, that a sympathetic judge will okay or anything like that. That could never happen. Fortification in the election. I would propose this. It's obvious now, with Let's Go Brandon and all these other memetic attacks, the strategy that I spoke about as soon as the asterisk administration began is working. Relentless satire and mockery of Biden is doing more to harm his credibility almost than the issues themselves, because of the memetic, varied, grassroots, democratized, if I mispronounce a word, people always jump down my throat, nature of politics. On the other end, you've got a situation in Virginia where if you're a Virginian, you need to get out and vote. And I would say vote Youngkin. There is a chance now to flip Virginia, and that would cause all-out chaos within U.S. politics. Just for the memetic purpose, and just for the fucking lulls, honestly, it would be funny to see like Joy-Ann Reid and Biden and Pelosi and all these other morons cry and screech about racism, and because they've been labeling Youngkin an extremist. They're like, well, he's Trump in khakis. Okay, well then, wouldn't that be a great bellwether for the midterms or 2024? I think that Trump is carefully monitoring the situation there as well. Biden won the state, honk honk, by a significant margin. If it swung 10 points in the other direction in less than a year, boy, what a rebuke about his policies. And Trump is waiting in the wings and studying the situation. I believe that he wishes to run in 2024, again, barring medical problems or something like that. But he's monitoring these things, and he's looking at the numbers, and he's saying, what does this mean about a potential Trump candidacy? Supposedly, the fact that Trump is adjacent to and speaks well of Youngkin is dragging him down. What if he wins, though, in a race where he was favored to lose by almost double digits? Well, it shows Trump is not as toxic after all. All these people, they keep telling me, no, Trump's done. No, I wouldn't vote for him again. He's become toxic. That's the new buzz term of certain leftoids these days. I guess that the consensus is not with you. It already looks like that's not the case. At the very least, this is going to be a squeaker election decided by, a few tens of thousands of votes. It'll probably have an automatic recount, in all honesty. Youngkin now has the lead. Very slight at the 11th hour because of a Fox News poll. But even then, before this, it was a statistical tie, with a couple of recent polls calling it literally a tie. Keep in mind, one of those three polls was problematic too. I analyzed that the other day. Biden's disapproval is playing a role there. And it's going to play a role elsewhere. Oh, wait till the midterms. I can't wait till you see the result. I can pretty much see it in my head already, but we'll wait for more adequate polling, like, within 6 months of it actually being election day. Before that, making ironclad predictions is not something that I tend to do. You can definitely look at the trajectory of politics and you can take a pretty accurate reading, but we don't know what the final result will be. I would expect, though, at this point, the Dems lose the House or the Senate, probably both. Biden's not doing them any favors. Supposedly, again, keep in mind the symbology behind Virginia here. Terry McAuliffe is basically like a state-level Joe Biden anyway. He was a literal Clinton crony. Youngkin is supposedly the doppelganger of Donald Trump who simply wants to be a gubernatorial candidate. Supposedly, Carlyle Group, Youngkin is the same as Trump. He's the same kind of crazy extremist. So then in the matchup, you would expect, if Biden weren't crashing and burning, that Youngkin would lose, because Biden carried the state by like 7 points. So I don't think that that's going to occur. That's about all. Peace out.